July 25, 1944, Munich, Germany. A low hum ripples through the Bavarian countryside, growing into a strange, unearthly whine. On the tarmac of Lechfeld Airfield, engineers in oil-stained uniforms cover their ears as two silver streaks lift off the runway, faster, smoother, and louder than anything the Luftwaffe has ever seen. Major Walter Nowotny, an ace pilot with over 250 confirmed kills, grips the throttle. Beneath him, twin jet engines roar with an alien power. The aircraft shudders, then surges forward. No propeller, no piston growl, just pure, screaming thrust. The Messerschmitt Me-262, codenamed Schwalbe, Swallow, has taken flight. For the first time in history, a jet-powered fighter slices through the sky. And down below, a handful of German engineers realize they've just glimpsed the future of warfare. But the future has arrived too late. The concept for this machine began years earlier, long before Nowotny ever touched its controls. In 1938, deep inside Messerschmitt's Augsburg design offices, a small team led by Willy Messerschmitt was chasing a dream. The Reich Ministry of Aviation had heard whispers of jet propulsion, an experimental technology involving turbines instead of propellers. It was still theoretical, unstable, unreliable, and prone to self-destruction. But Messerschmitt saw what others didn't. If it worked, it could change everything. He assigned two young engineers, Hans Hornung and Robert Lusser, to begin preliminary designs. The aircraft, they imagined, would be sleek, with swept wings and nacelles slung under the fuselage, a predator built for speed beyond comprehension. Meanwhile, in laboratories across Germany, engineers Hans von Ohain and Ernst Heinkel were developing the Hayes 3 jet engine. In 1939, von Ohain's creation lifted the Heinkel He-178, the world's first jet-powered aircraft, into the sky. It was crude and underpowered, but it worked. The Luftwaffe leadership took note. The age of the jet had begun. By 1941, Messerschmitt's prototype, now officially designated the Me-262V1, rolled out for taxi tests. It was sleek, futuristic, and impossibly fast-looking. But there was a problem. The jet engines weren't ready. The Junkers Jumo 004 engines, still in prototype stage, were prone to flameouts, compressor stalls, and catastrophic failure. To continue flight testing, the engineers attached a single Jumo 210 piston engine in the nose, just to get it off the ground. It looked absurd, a jet with a propeller, but it allowed crucial aerodynamic tests to continue. In April 1941, the first true jet power test flight finally took place. The Me-262 screamed across the airfield, trailing heat and thunder. Test pilot Fritz Wendel later wrote, "The sensation was beyond anything I'd felt. It was as though the future had broken through the clouds. But the future, as always, had enemies." Within the Reich Ministry of Aviation, bureaucracy reigned supreme. The Air Ministry, led by Erhard Milch, clashed constantly with Willy Messerschmitt over budgets, priorities, and politics. Messerschmitt was seen as arrogant, too close to the Nazi elite, too defiant toward military hierarchy. Then came Hitler's interference. When Adolf Hitler was shown the Me-262 in 1943, he was impressed, but he misunderstood its purpose. Rather than seeing it as a fighter to defend the Reich, Hitler envisioned it as a Blitz bomber, a fast attack aircraft that could strike London or the Normandy beaches. "This is not a defensive machine," he insisted. "It will be my revenge weapon." From that moment, the Me-262's destiny was twisted by politics. Production orders were delayed. Modifications for bomb racks, aiming systems, and payloads consumed precious months. Every engineer protested that it would ruin the aircraft as agility and purpose, but no one could defy the Führer. And so the Luftwaffe's miracle weapon sat idle, waiting for approval that came far too late. By mid-1944, Allied bombers pounded German cities daily. The skies over Europe belonged to the Americans and the British. The Me-262 could have changed that balance, but only if it had been deployed a year earlier. Instead, German factories struggled under bombardment. Engine components melted in test benches. Pilots trained on obsolete aircraft. And the Allied invasion of Normandy had begun. Still, hope remained. The Luftwaffe's senior officers knew that if the Me-262 could be fielded, it might buy Germany time, perhaps even force the Allies to negotiate. Nowotny's flight on that July morning symbolized both triumph and tragedy. As his jet disappeared into the clouds, his comrades on the ground erupted in cheers. But inside the command centers, the war's end was already written. The Reich had built the world's first operational jet fighter and ensured it would arrive too late to matter. August 23, 1943, Rastenburg, East Prussia. Inside the Wolf's lair, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Generals gather around a large map spread across the oak table. Allied arrows push deeper into France and Italy. At the head of the table, Adolf Hitler studies a dossier stamped Geheimkommandozach Top Secret. Inside, photographs of a strange new plane. Sleek, swept wings, no propeller. The Messerschmitt Me 262. The Führer's eyes light up. A miracle machine, he murmurs. It will strike fear into our enemies. But then he asks the fatal question. How many bombs can it carry? The officers exchange uneasy glances. General Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters, steps forward. Mein Führer, it is a fighter, a defensive weapon. It will protect our cities from bombers. Hitler's face hardens. No, I need weapons of offense. This aircraft will carry bombs. It will attack London, the invasion beaches, not chase enemy fighters. With that order, the course of aviation history changes. Back in Augsburg, engineers receive Hitler's decree with disbelief. Willy Messerschmitt knows what this means. Adding bomb racks, a bomb sight, reinforced pylons, all of which will ruin the aircraft's speed and maneuverability. The Me 262 was designed as a predator, not a mule. Engineers like Robert Lusser and Hans Hornung argued desperately with the Air Ministry. Reports fly back and forth, stamped urgent, top priority, confidential. The men at the drawing boards know they're watching perfection being mutilated. Meanwhile, General Galland and Werner Thierfelder, head of flight testing, continue to push for a fighter version. They even test the aircraft in secret, without bomber modifications, proving its unmatched performance. During a classified trial near Lechfeld, Galland flies the Me 262 himself. It was like being pushed by angels, he later said. No piston engine could catch me. But when Galland reports to Hitler, the response is cold fury. I decide what the aircraft will be, Hitler snaps. It is my bomber. The dream of a jet interceptor, the one weapon that might have stopped the Allied bombing campaigns, is buried under layers of bureaucracy and ego. While the Führer obsesses over his Blitzbomber, Allied bombers grow bolder. The B-17s and Lancasters blacken the skies, reducing German cities to rubble. The Luftwaffe's fighter wings are exhausted, their experienced pilots dead or captured. Germany desperately needs a miracle. But the Me 262 remains stuck in endless redesigns. Then, in late 1943, the Jumo 004 engines, the heart of the jet, begin full-scale testing. Each engine produces about 1,980 pounds of thrust, revolutionary for its time. But they are fragile. Built from inferior alloys, they rarely last more than 25 flight hours before failure. Still, the engineers press on. In cold hangars, under dim lights and the roar of air raid sirens, they work around the clock. They cannibalize parts, smuggle materials, even barter with factory managers to get the Me 262 into production. By early 1944, the first operational jets roll off the assembly line. But the order remains. It must be configured as a bomber. April 1944, Lechfeld Airfield. Adolf Galland watches with silent rage as a test pilot lifts off in the new Blitzbomber variant. Two small bombs hang beneath the wings, dragging down the aircraft's aerodynamics. At 700 kilometers per hour, the Me 262 should be nearly untouchable. But loaded with bombs, its climb rate suffers, its agility collapses. Galland's reports are ignored. Meanwhile, the Allies continue their relentless advance. The Luftwaffe's numbers dwindle daily. The skies are no longer theirs. Finally, the first Me 262 units, Erprobungskommando 262, are formed for testing and limited operations. Young pilots are stunned by the jet speed. It can outfly anything the Allies have, the Mustang, the Spitfire, even the Lightning. But it's still treated as a prototype, a curiosity. Hitler's obsession with the bomber version delays full-scale deployment until late summer 1944, by which time Germany is already retreating on all fronts. Inside the factories, things grow worse. Allied bombers target Messerschmitt's plants directly. Assembly lines are scattered, production moved to underground tunnels and forests. Workers labor in freezing conditions. In Augsburg, a technician mutters bitterly, "We have the weapon to win the air war, but we build it for ghosts." By mid-1944, the Me 262's potential is obvious to everyone except Hitler. Only after D-Day, when the Allies have already landed in Normandy, does the Führer finally relent. He allows a pure fighter version, but by then, fuel is scarce, factories are shattered, and experienced pilots are gone. The world's first operational jet fighter is finally cleared for combat 3 years after it was conceived, and 6 months too late to matter. And in the ruins of Germany, a new name begins to emerge, Major Walter Nowotny, the man chosen to command the first jet fighter squadron in history. September 26, 1944, Akmar Airfield, northwestern Germany. Dawn breaks through the mist, revealing a strange sight on the runway. Not the usual Bf-109s or F-190s, but something utterly alien, silver-gray aircraft with smooth, swept wings and engines mounted beneath. They gleam like sharks at rest. Standing beside one of them is Major Walter Nowotny, 23 years old, tall, sharp-eyed, already a legend. Over 250 aerial victories on the Eastern Front. A hero of the Reich. And now, the commander of the world's first operational jet fighter squadron, Commando Nowotny. Mechanics swarm around the machines, warming up the temperamental Jumo 004 engines, which howl like wounded wolves. Fuel trucks sputter in the cold morning air. Ground crewmen, exhausted and nervous, know they're witnessing history, and possibly their commander's last flight. Nowotny climbs into the cockpit of Mi-262 White 8. The canopy snaps shut. The roar rises. And with a thunderous burst, the jet leaps down the runway, faster than any aircraft before it. The age of the jet fighter has begun. When the order came to form a dedicated jet squadron, Nowotny didn't hesitate. Despite the risks, he believed in the Mi-262, its speed, its promise, its power to turn the tide. But flying it was a gamble. The Jumo 004 engines were marvels of engineering and disasters of reliability. Built from substandard metals due to wartime shortages, their turbine blades warped at high temperature. Too much throttle and they disintegrated mid-flight. Too little and they stalled. Takeoff and landing were the most dangerous moments. The jet's acceleration was sluggish at low speeds, and its engines took 8 long seconds to respond, a death sentence if Allied fighters attacked. Yet once airborne, nothing on Earth could catch it. The Mi-262 could reach over 870 km per hour, nearly 200 faster than any Allied fighter. In early engagements, Allied pilots were left stunned. Reports flooded intelligence channels. Enemy aircraft, silver, no propeller, extreme speed. Unable to pursue. American airmen began calling it the Stormbird. Others simply called it impossible. But for Nowotny and his men, victory was anything but easy. Their base at Akhmar was under constant threat from Allied air raids. Fuel was rationed. Spare parts were nearly impossible to find, and then there was the training, or lack of it. Pilots arriving to join Commando Nowotny often had fewer than 20 hours of flight time on the Mi-262. Some had never even seen a jet up close before their first combat sortie. Still, they went up. And when they met the enemy, they saw what the Mi-262 could truly do. During one engagement over Munster, Nowotny and his wingmen encountered a formation of B-24 Liberators. They dove in from above, closing the distance in seconds. 4 cannon shells minus 30mm rounds from the Mi-262's nose-mounted Mk-108s tore through a bomber as wing. The American aircraft exploded mid-air, the others scattered. For the first time in the war, the hunters had become the hunted. But every flight carried danger. Allied fighters began circling the jet bases, waiting for takeoff or landing, when the Mi-262 was slow, vulnerable, and exposed. American P-51 Mustangs patrolled near Akhmar and Hessepi, their pilots eager to claim the first jet kill. One afternoon in late October, Nowotny barely escaped such a trap. His right engine flamed out at 1,000 meters. The left sputtered. He managed to glide the crippled jet down to the runway, smoke trailing behind. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, ground crew rushed to pull him out. He laughed, but everyone knew how close it had been. November 8, 1944. The day began like any other. Clouds over Akhmar, radio chatter filling the tower. Nowotny received reports of incoming Allied bombers over Osnabrück. He scrambled his Mi-262, accompanied by 2 other pilots. At 9:45 a.m., they made contact, a massive Allied formation, with Mustangs circling above as escorts. Nowotny dived in, firing bursts that sent one bomber spiraling down. Then the P-51s pounced. On the radio, his voice was calm but urgent. 2 Mustangs behind me. Left engine hit. Fire, can control. Moments later, witnesses saw a jet trailing black smoke plunge from the clouds and crash near EP. The explosion shook the ground. Major Walter Nowotny, Germany's first jet ace, was dead. He was 23. His death stunned the Luftwaffe. But in Berlin, propaganda immediately turned him into a martyr. Headlines proclaimed, "Hero of the Reich falls in the sky. Jet ace Nowotny immortalized." Yet among the pilots who trained under him, there was only grief and exhaustion. They knew the truth. The Mi-262 was a masterpiece trapped in a nightmare, brilliant, but born into a war that had already been lost. Still, the jet squadrons would grow. Hitler, finally desperate, ordered mass production. And in late 1944, a new name entered the sky. JG-7, Jagdgeschwader 7 Nowotny, the first full jet fighter wing in history. Their mission: defend the dying Reich with the fastest aircraft ever built. December 1944, Brandenburg, Germany. Snow falls softly over the airfield at Parchim, muffling the sound of boots on frozen ground. Beneath camouflaged tarps, rows of sleek Me-262s glint in the pale winter light. Mechanics work in silence, breath steaming in the cold. Above them, a new banner flutters, JG-7 Nowotny, the first and only operational jet fighter wing in the world. Their commander, Oberst Johannes Macke Steinhoff, watches the men prepare for takeoff. He knows what's at stake. The Allies bomb German cities daily, thousands of aircraft, wave after wave. If JG-7 can succeed, even for a few weeks, they might buy the right time. But Steinhoff also knows what they're flying. Machines faster than anything in the air, yet cursed with fragile engines, limited fuel, and inexperienced pilots. Still, as the first pair of Me-262s roar down the runway, everyone turns to look. The thunder builds, then fades into the clouds. The Reich's final gamble has taken flight. The creation of JG-7 was Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring's desperate attempt to regain control of the skies. Hitler's armies were retreating on every front. Cities lay in ruins. The once invincible Luftwaffe was shattered, its ranks filled with teenagers and half-trained recruits. But the Me-262 offered a glimmer of hope. At top speed, it could outrun every Allied aircraft. Its 4 Mk-108 cannons could shred bombers with a single burst. If deployed in large numbers, the Me-262 might have blunted the Allied air offensive, or at least forced the enemy to think twice before daylight raids. Yet reality was crueler than theory. The Jumo 004 engines, still unreliable, often failed after just 10 hours of flight. The turbine blades, made from low-grade steel instead of heat-resistant alloys, melted under sustained use. Every sortie risked mechanical failure. And worse, Germany no longer controlled its skies. Allied fighters prowled near every airfield, waiting to ambush the jets during takeoff and landing. Even before JG-7's first missions, the airbases at Brandenburg, Oranienburg, and Lechfeld were under constant bombardment. The first combat operation of JG-7 took place on February 21, 1945. During Operation Clarion, the Allied campaign to destroy German transportation networks. 50 Me-262s took off to intercept the incoming formations, but only 30 reached altitude. The rest suffered mechanical issues or engine fires. Still, when they attacked, the results were astonishing. The jets dove through the bomber streams like predators, cannons blazing. B-17s exploded mid-air. B-24s broke apart in spirals of smoke. Allied gunners fired wildly but couldn't detract the targets. The Me-262s were simply too fast. A U.S. airman later wrote in his diary, "They came out of nowhere, silver ghosts. I thought I was seeing the future." In that single day, JG-7 claimed over 30 bombers destroyed for the loss of only 3 jets. The Allied commanders were alarmed. They issued new orders: target the jets before they could take off. From then on, every Me-262 pilot flew knowing death might be waiting right above the runway. Meanwhile, Hitler's interference continued to cripple production. Even as the Luftwaffe begged for more fighters, the Führer insisted on diverting resources to the Me-262's bomber variant, now renamed the A2A Sturmvogel, Stormbird. Entire factories were forced to retool for a version no one wanted. In the chaos, Messerschmitt's engineers hid components for fighter models inside crates marked as bomber parts, trying to get them past bureaucratic inspection. It was sabotage born of desperation. But by early 1945, it didn't matter. The Allied bombing campaign had destroyed most of Germany's industrial base. Fuel depots burned, railways were shattered. The Me-262s could barely fly a handful of missions per week due to fuel shortages. The world's most advanced fighter was now trapped by the ruins of the nation that built it. In March 1945, JG-7 reached its peak strength. Around 70 operational jets spread across several bases. They flew relentless sorties, attacking bomber formations over Berlin and the Elbe River. In one engagement, Captain Heinrich Bauer, a seasoned ace, downed 3 B-17s in under 4 minutes. His final tally in jets reached 16, a record that would stand for decades. But even the victories felt hollow. For every bomber they destroyed, dozens more reached their targets. Entire cities, Dresden, Hamburg, Nuremberg, vanished under firestorms. The Me-262 could win battles, but it could no longer win the war. By April, the end was inevitable. Allied troops were crossing the Rhine. Soviet armies closed in from the east. At Brandenburg, mechanics worked by candlelight, scavenging spare parts from wrecked aircraft. Pilots slept in hangars, using parachutes as blankets. When the order came to defend Berlin, JG-7 pilots knew it was suicide. Yet they went anyway. On April 26, a small formation of Me-262s took off into the smoky skies. Below them, the city burned. Above, Allied bombers filled the heavens. The jets struck hard, slicing through the bomber streams, scoring kills, but they were overwhelmed. One by one, they fell. By the end of that day, only a handful of Me-262s remained. And still, somewhere in the ruins, Willy Messerschmitt sat in his office, blueprint in hand, muttering to an aide, "It could have saved us, if they'd let it fly sooner." The jet that could have changed history was dying with the Reich. February 1945, over Western Germany. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager of the U.S. 357th Fighter Group tightens his grip on the controls of his P-51D Mustang. His radio crackles, bandits at 12 o'clock high silver jets. Yeager squints against the sun and freezes. Two shapes streak across the sky, impossibly fast, leaving faint trails behind them. No propellers. No exhaust flame. Just the whine of turbines cutting through the cold air. "Jesus, what is that?" he mutters. The Me-262s dive through a formation of B-17s, fire a short burst, and vanish. Two bombers explode instantly, their wings sheared off. The entire attack lasts less than 30 seconds. By the time the P-51s react, the jets are already miles away. For the first time, Allied pilots realize they are facing something truly revolutionary, a weapon from the future, built by a regime on the brink of collapse. Allied intelligence had heard rumors since 1943, whispers of turbine aircraft being tested at Augsburg and Lechfeld, but few believed them. Many thought it was propaganda, or experimental prototypes that would never reach combat. Now, with pilots returning from missions reporting silver, fast, propellerless planes, those rumors turned into fear. Commanders at 8th Air Force HQ in England ordered immediate reconnaissance. Photos from high-altitude Spitfire PR flights confirmed it. Sleek twin-engine jets parked at strange camouflaged airfields. The Allies were stunned, not only by the Me-262's speed, but by what it represented, a leap in technology that none of the Allied nations had yet achieved. It was proof that, even in ruin, German engineering remained formidable. The first confirmed jet kills sent shockwaves through Allied command. By early 1945, Me-262 pilots were claiming dozens of bombers destroyed each week. American aircrews nicknamed them the Blowtorch Bandits. The RAF scrambled to adapt. Fighter Command issued new tactics. Attack Me-262s during takeoff or landing, when their engines were slow to respond. Bomb their runways and fuel depots relentlessly. Establish fighter patrols near known jet bases, code-named Rat Catchers. Soon, Mustangs began orbiting above Lechfeld, Neuburg, and Brandenburg, waiting for the jets to appear. For the Me-262 pilots, every takeoff became a race against death. One American squadron commander, Colonel Hubert Zemke, described the first time his unit engaged a Me-262. "They came at us like comets. By the time we saw them, they were already gone. But when they landed, that's when we got them." P-51s would dive from altitude as the jets returned to base, catching them just before their wheels touched the runway. It was brutal but effective. Many of Germany's best pilots died not in dogfights but seconds from home. Even so, the Allies couldn't ignore what they'd seen. In Washington and London, captured reports from downed German pilots were studied intensely. Engineers examined wrecked Me-262s recovered from crash sites. One British officer who inspected a downed jet near Remagen wrote, "We are witnessing the birth of a new era. This aircraft is 50 years ahead of its time." The United States immediately accelerated its own jet program, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. The British pushed development of the Gloster Meteor, already flying in limited operations but far slower than the German jet. The race for post-war air supremacy had begun before the war even ended. For the men flying against it, however, the Me-262 was both terrifying and tragic. Lieutenant Edwin Wright, a P-47 pilot, recalled seeing one explode in midair. It wasn't shot down, it just came apart. The engine flamed, and the thing broke in two. You could tell those pilots were fighting the machine as much as us. That was the cruel irony. Germany had created a masterpiece it could barely operate. Every sortie consumed precious fuel that no longer existed. Every mission cost pilots they couldn't replace. By March 1945, Allied pilots had learned the Me-262's weaknesses: slow throttle response, fragile engines, and deadly vulnerability on the runway. The same machine that symbolized the future was also a death trap for its own pilots. And yet, despite all this, the Me-262's impact was undeniable. It had changed the way men thought about flight. Speed was no longer limited by propellers. Air combat would never be the same. As one U.S. intelligence officer wrote in April 1945, if they'd had 6 months more, The skies of Europe might look very different, but the Third Reich had no more months left. The Soviets were advancing from the east. American tanks rolled toward the Rhine. The Luftwaffe was fighting with its last drops of fuel. And in a few hidden workshops across Bavaria, engineers worked feverishly on something even more audacious. A single-seat rocket interceptor designed to climb faster than gravity itself. The Messerschmitt Me 163. Komet, Germany's other miracle weapon. The race toward the end, and toward the future, was entering its final chapter. Hitler's intervention, the jet becomes a bomber. July 1944. At the Vorhauptquartier in Rastenburg, East Prussia, Adolf Hitler sits surrounded by maps, cigarette smoke, and an air of exhaustion masked by fury. Reports from Normandy describe Allied troops breaking through, Luftwaffe bases overrun, and the once mighty Wehrmacht retreating westward. Yet among the chaos, a glimmer of hope flickers. The Me 262. The generals and engineers have been pleading for its mass production as a fighter. But to Hitler, the word defensive is poison. He doesn't want fighters intercepting bombers. He wants bombers to strike terror into enemy cities. So when Willy Messerschmitt presents his sleek prototype, the Führer interrupts mid-sentence. 9. Not as a fighter, as a blitz bomber. A lightning bomber that will turn the tide. His aides exchange nervous glances. Göring stays silent. Even Milch, who had supported the fighter program, knows it's dangerous to contradict the Führer. Hitler's vision is fixed. The Me 262 will carry bombs, not chase enemy fighters. Back in Augsburg, Messerschmitt engineers stare in disbelief as orders arrive. The Me 262 must be modified to carry two 250-kilogram bombs. The sleek jet, designed for speed and agility, suddenly needs reinforced wings, bomb racks, and a new balance of weight. Test pilot Hans Fay remembers that day clearly. He had risked his life flying the early prototypes. The idea of loading bombs onto the jet made him furious. It was like asking a greyhound to pull a wagon, he later recalled. The modifications cripple performance. The aircraft's center of gravity shifts, reducing stability. The landing gear, already fragile, struggles with the added weight. And most crucially, the Me 262's speed advantage, its one true gift, is compromised. Meanwhile, frontline Luftwaffe units are desperate for anything that can challenge the relentless Allied bombing campaigns. Cologne, Hamburg, Munich, all lie in ruins. German aces beg for jets that can intercept the bomber streams. But the bureaucracy moves like molasses, trapped between conflicting commands from Hitler, Göring, and the Armaments Ministry. Major Walter Nowotny, a celebrated ace with 258 kills, is chosen to lead Erprobungskommando 262, the test and evaluation unit for the new jets. He writes in his logbook, "We finally have the speed to strike back. If only they let us use it." But Hitler's insistence continues. He envisions Me 262 swooping over the beaches of Normandy, obliterating Allied supply lines. It's a fantasy disconnected from logistical reality, runways too short, fuel too scarce, and jets still fragile from early engine failures. In August 1944, Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, dares to confront Hitler. He argues that Germany's only chance is to use the Me 262 as a fighter to defend against the bomber onslaught. But Hitler explodes in rage. "You don't understand, Speer. If we destroy the enemy supply lines, the bombers will not come." That outburst seals the jet's fate. Production is delayed for months as engineers scramble to meet new bomber specifications. By autumn, Allied bombers blacken the skies over Germany. The jet that could have changed the balance remains locked in bureaucratic purgatory, a marvel grounded by one man's obsession. At the Rechlin Test Center, an exhausted team of mechanics watch as another Jumo 004 engine flames out on takeoff. A few curse under their breath. The war is slipping away and their miracle machine is being turned into a tool for a lost cause. Night falls over the hangars. Under the dim light, an engineer whispers to a colleague, almost in defiance. "Someday they'll call this the future. But tonight, it's just another dream that's come too late." Outside, the air vibrates faintly with distant thunder, or perhaps the echo of Allied bombers returning from another raid. The Me 262's shadow grows longer, but the war around it burns shorter. The jet enters combat, but too late. August 26, 1944, over the skies of northern France, a formation of American B-17s drones steadily toward its target, the industrial city of Ludwigshafen. Escorting them, squadrons of P-51 Mustangs weave in loose formation, silver wings flashing in the sunlight. Far below, at Lechfeld Airfield in Bavaria, the ground trembles. Two sleek shapes roar down the runway. Messerschmitt Me 262A1A Schwalbe, Swallow. At the controls is Lieutenant Alfred Schreiber, a young Luftwaffe pilot barely in his 20s. His mission: intercept the bomber stream and test what no one has ever faced before: jet versus propeller combat. The engines whine with an otherworldly shriek. The Jumo 4 spool up unevenly, threatening to stall at any moment. Then suddenly, the jet leaps forward, accelerating faster than anything Schreiber has ever flown. Within seconds, the ground vanishes. He levels out at 20,000 feet, scanning the horizon. There they are, black dots glinting against the blue. He pushes the throttle forward, the world blurs. In the blink of an eye, he's among them. Tracers streak past, but they seem almost motionless compared to the Me-262 speed. Schreiber squeezes the trigger. The 430mm Mk108 cannons thunder in unison. One B-17 erupts into flame. Debris spirals downward. It's over in seconds. The Americans have no idea what hit them. Back on the ground, news of the kill spreads like wildfire. It's confirmed. The Me-262 has scored its first victory. Göring is ecstatic. Propaganda reels label it the wonder weapon that will save the Reich. But in the hangars, the engineers know better. The reality is far more fragile. Every flight is a gamble. Engines fail mid-air. Replacement parts are scarce. The Me-262 guzzles fuel that Germany can barely produce. And worst of all, the Luftwaffe's infrastructure is collapsing. Allied air raids target runways, factories, even transport trains carrying the precious jets. By late 1944, Jagdgeschwader 7, Nowotny, becomes the first operational Me-262 fighter unit. Major Walter Nowotny, already a legend, leads from the front. He believes the jet could still make a difference. But on November 8, 1944, fate intervenes. That morning, Nowotny scrambles from Akmer airfield to intercept Allied bombers over Munster. Ground control loses contact. Minutes later, villagers hear an explosion. His Me-262 crashes in flames near Hesepie. He's dead at 23. The loss devastates morale. Even Hitler, upon hearing the news, is shaken briefly. But he still refuses to admit his mistake. The bomber version of the Me-262 continues to drain time and resources. Meanwhile, the Allies adapt. American pilots begin setting traps, circling near airfields, waiting for the jets to take off or land. They know the Me-262's weakness. Its engines take precious seconds to spool up, making it nearly defenseless during takeoff and landing. P-51 squadrons swarm over German airfields, gunning down Me-262s before they can even lift off. The Luftwaffe responds by building camouflage taxiways and installing flak batteries, but the losses mount. In the air, when the Me-262 is at full speed, it's untouchable. Pilots describe it as like chasing a ghost. But speed alone cannot win a war. There are too few jets, too little fuel, and too late a start. By December 1944, Germany has fewer than 100 operational Me-262s, barely enough to dent the massive Allied bombing armadas now pulverizing the heart of the Reich. Still, the pilots fight on. Lieutenant Franz Schall, one of the surviving aces, writes in his diary, "When I fly her, it feels like touching the future. But when I land, I see the ruins of the present." Each sortie becomes a paradox, a glimpse of tomorrow's technology waging a battle already lost. The Me-262 had come alive, howling across the sky like a vengeful spirit. But its birth had been delayed too long, trapped by politics, pride, and the chaos of a dying empire. The question now wasn't whether it could win the war, but whether it could survive it. Germany's last gamble in the skies, February 1945. The Third Reich is collapsing. Soviet tanks thunder across the Vistula. The Allies grind their way toward the Rhine. Cities lie in ruins, their streets filled with ash and silence. Yet above this dying empire, the Luftwaffe clings to a dream. The dream of the Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapon that could somehow turn it all around. At Lechfeld and Munich-Rhein, the Me-262s sit lined up in the snow, sleek, deadly silhouettes under a gray winter sky. Ground crews work in silence, freezing hands fumbling with wrenches. Each jet is precious. Each flight risks not only an aircraft, but a piece of Germany's last hope. Adolf Galland, the former inspector of fighters, has fallen out of favor with Göring. But in these final months, he's given one last chance to redeem the Luftwaffe. His mission: form a special squadron of experienced aces to fly the Me-262 in pure fighter roles, defying Hitler's bomber obsession. He calls it Jagdverband 44, the squadron of experts. Under Galland's command gather the best of the best: Gerhard Barkhorn, Walter Kropinski, Heinz Bauer, men who once ruled the skies over Europe. Now they fight not for victory, but for survival, flying out of Munich's battered airfields against impossible odds. Each sortie is chaos. Takeoffs under Allied strafing fire. Landings on crumbling runways. engines flaming out mid-climb. But when the Mi-262s break free into open sky, their power is undeniable. Allied pilots describe them as silver comets, diving through bomber formations, cannons roaring, vapor trails spiraling behind them. They came so fast, one B-17 gunner later recalled, "We had only seconds to fire before they vanished." In March 1945, JV-44 launches multiple missions against Allied bomber raids. In one encounter, Heinz Bauer single-handedly downs 3 P-51s, a near-impossible feat, before limping home on one engine. The pilots fight with unmatched skill, but it's a fight against inevitability. Fuel shortages cripple operations. Each Mi-262 sortie drains precious reserves from tanks needed by the Army. Allied bombing raids specifically target jet facilities. Augsburg, Regensburg, and Oberammergau are pounded relentlessly. Factories that once built 1,000 planes a month now barely produce a dozen. To protect the Mi-262s during takeoff and landing, Galland orders piston engine fighters to patrol low over the airfields, a suicide duty. They're called the Platzschutzstaffel, the Airfield Protection Squadron. Painted bright red for identification, these FW-190s often draw enemy fire away from the jets. Pilots joke grimly that their squadron should be called the Company of Dead Men. But even with all precautions, Allied dominance is overwhelming. P-51s and Tempests blanket the skies. Wherever the Mi-262s appear, they are hunted. One afternoon, an American ace named Chuck Yeager engages a jet over Germany. He dives from altitude, catching the Mi-262 as it slows to land. His guns roar. The jet bursts into flames, skidding across the field in a trail of smoke. It was fast, Yeager later said, but it was fighting a war that had already ended. By April 1945, JV-44 is reduced to a handful of operational aircraft. The Reich is in its death throes. Galland himself is wounded in combat but survives. When he's taken prisoner days later, he reportedly tells his captors, "We were just testing the future for you." And he was right. As Allied troops overrun Lechfeld airfield, they find rows of abandoned Mi-262s, some intact, others half dismantled, hidden under camouflage nets. American, British, and Soviet engineers swarm over them like archaeologists discovering alien relics. The war is almost over. Berlin burns. But in the shattered hangars of Bavaria, the next era of aviation has already been born. The Mi-262, too fast for its time, too few to matter, had opened a door humanity would never close again. The race to capture the Mi-262 April 30th, 1945, while Berlin burns and the Reich collapses into rubble, a quieter but equally momentous race unfolds across Germany. The hunt for the Mi-262. Allied commanders know about the jet. Intelligence reports and gun camera footage have confirmed it. A German aircraft faster than any propeller-driven fighter in existence. For months, the Allies have been obsessed with finding one intact. Now, as they push deeper into Bavaria, they get their chance. At Lechfeld Air Base, south of Augsburg, American troops approach cautiously through smoke and debris. The ground is littered with wreckage. Twisted Mi-262 fuselages, shattered engines, and half-buried fuel drums. But inside the hangars, they find something incredible. Several Mi-262s, untouched, fully assembled. One of them still gleams under a thin film of dust, the swastika bright on its tail, its nose painted with a red spiral. Lieutenant Colonel Harold E. Watson, commander of the U.S. Army Air Force's Watson's Whizzers, stands before the aircraft in stunned silence. His orders are clear: capture the technology, ship it to America, and learn everything. Within days, the hangars are filled with American flight engineers, mechanics, and intelligence officers. They photograph every detail, from the Jumo 004's intricate turbine blades to the swept-back wing geometry. German technicians, now prisoners of war, are brought in to explain their designs. Many comply, others, fearful or ashamed, refuse to speak. The Americans aren't the only ones. The British and Soviets are racing too. Soviet engineers comb through the ruins of Dessau and Prague, desperate to find surviving jets. In one case, Red Army troops reportedly seize an Mi-262 still warm from its last flight. It's a technological gold rush. The Allies aren't just ending a war, they re-seizing the blueprint for the next one. In the skies above Germany, captured Mi-262s take flight again, this time with Allied stars painted over the black crosses. American test pilot Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, then still a young flyer, later described watching one of them streak past during evaluation. It was like seeing tomorrow fly by. At Farnborough, British test pilot Eric Winkle Brown climbs into a captured Mi-262. His report is precise, almost reverent. Acceleration was breathtaking. handling above 500 miles per hour, steady as a rock. But the engines, delicate, a marvel, yet fragile. The Allies soon realized that while Germany lost the war, its engineers had pushed technology decades ahead. The Me-262 becomes the cornerstone of post-war jet development. In America, engineers at Bell Aircraft study its aerodynamic profile while developing the Bell X-1, the rocket plane that would later break the sound barrier. In the Soviet Union, its design heavily influences the MiG-9 and later the MiG-15, which would face the West in Korea. Even Britain's Gloster Meteor program, which entered limited service before the war's end, borrows insights from the Me-262's data, its wing angles, its jet compression design, even its failures. But in 1945, amid victory celebrations and the first steps into the atomic age, a darker truth lingers among those who witnessed the Me-262's rise and fall. It was a weapon that came too late. A machine that might have changed history, if not strangled by the arrogance and obsession of its own creators. Willie Messerschmitt is captured by American forces in May. When questioned about the delays, he doesn't speak of politics or pride. He simply says, "We built the future." But the future needed peace, not war. As he's led away from his shattered factory, Allied aircraft thunder overhead, jets, still crude but improving every month. The torch has passed. In the wreckage of Hitler's empire lies the seed of a new world, one where speed, power, and technology will redefine not only warfare, but humanity's destiny. The Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, was born in the fire of a lost war, only to become the foundation for the skies of the modern age. The birth of the modern air age, May 1945. Germany has surrendered. The gunfire fades, the ruins settle into silence, and across the conquered nation, Allied engineers unpack the future. In hangars from Lechfeld to Prague, the Me-262s stand like ghosts of another age, cold, sleek, and lifeless. Their smooth fuselages gleam beneath tattered camouflage nets, their turbine blades still smelling faintly of burned kerosene. Around them, Allied officers and scientists walk in quiet awe. The war had ended before the jet could prove itself. But its influence had only just begun. Within weeks, American cargo ships begin loading the captured Me-262s in their engines. Operation LUSTY, Luftwaffe Secret Technology, sends the jets to Wright Field, Ohio. Engineers from Bell, Lockheed, and North American Aviation gather around them, notebooks in hand, studying every detail. Major General Donald Putt, one of the program's leaders, writes in his report, "The Germans, through desperation, achieved a technological leap unmatched in modern history." The Me-262 is the foundation from which all jet aircraft will evolve, and he's right. In 1947, just 2 years later, the Bell X-1, influenced by German aerodynamic data, breaks the sound barrier with Chuck Yeager at the controls. The jet age has truly begun. In Britain, Rolls-Royce perfects the Derwent turbojet, refining concepts borrowed from captured Jumo 4s. The Gloster Meteor, once limited and sluggish, evolves into the swift Meteor F-8, setting the standard for post-war jet design. In the Soviet Union, engineers at Mikoyan Gurevich pore over Me-262 wrecks and documents seized by the Red Army. They adapt its ideas into their own machines, first the MiG-9, then the revolutionary MiG-15, the fighter that would dominate the skies over Korea and shock the West. Even the French, rebuilding after years of occupation, base their Dassault Ouragan jets on German aerodynamic findings. Every nation, victor and vanquished alike, carries a fragment of the Me-262's DNA. But the story of the Schwalbe Swallow isn't only one of innovation, it's also one of tragedy and wasted potential. The jet had been ready in concept by 1942. If it had been unleashed then, as a fighter, not a bomber, it could have devastated Allied bombing campaigns, bought Germany time, perhaps even altered strategy. But bureaucracy, politics, and Hitler's interference doomed it. Heinrich Beauvais, one of the Luftwaffe's wartime engineers, later reflected bitterly, "We built a weapon that could have defended Germany. Instead, we built a bomber that defended Hitler's pride." The Me-262's greatest legacy may not be its victories, but its warnings about how innovation and ego, when intertwined, can destroy both purpose and progress. By war's end, fewer than 1,400 Me-262s had been built. Of those, only about 300 ever flew in combat. They claimed around 500 Allied aircraft, a fraction of the thousands that blackened Germany's skies. And yet, for every Allied pilot who saw one streak past, too fast to chase, too advanced to comprehend, the experience left an indelible mark. "When we first saw it," remembered American ace Bud Anderson, "it felt like we'd looked into the future, and it was German. Today, A handful of Me-262 survive in museums in Washington, D.C., Munich, London, and Krakow. Some are originals, others rebuilt from blueprints. They sit behind glass, silent but defiant, their lines still futuristic even 80 years later. Visitors walk past them, reading placards and staring into the jet intakes, wondering what it must have felt like to fly one when the world still burned. The Schwalbe remains both a marvel and a warning, proof that human genius can soar even in the darkest times, but also that brilliance alone cannot redeem the madness of war. In the end, the Messerschmitt Me-262 didn't save the Reich. It couldn't even slow its fall. But it did change everything that came after. From the ashes of its failure rose the jet-powered world, faster, higher, and forever chasing the horizon the Swallow first touched.